All right, we have the recording going. So thank you everybody for attending today. We have Jeff Weekley from UC Merced, and he is going to be talking about the wave. So I'll mute and let you take it away, Jeff.
Okay, well, thanks, Jason. So for those of you joining us by video, you may see the this rather media-heavy presentation stutter a little bit, but hopefully the recording will be high rate. So as Jason said, my name is Jeffrey Weekley. I'm the Director of Research Computing and Cyber Infrastructure at the University of California, Merced. I won't go into a lot of detail about UC Merced, but it is the newest of the 10 UC campuses. And we're located about 45 minutes from the gate of Yosemite and about 2 hours due east from the Monterey Bay or Silicon Valley area. We have about 6,000 students, and we are focused on research-coupled graduate education. I come from many years as research faculty at the Naval Postgraduate School, where I was founding faculty of the MOVES Institute, and MOVES is Modeling Virtual Environments and Simulations. And there I worked on VR back in the early days. But today we're going to show you some rather advanced infrastructure and talk about how that plugs into our research and also our teaching and learning. And so with that, let's get started. So let me just, so the wave is not new, or rather the technology behind the wave is not new. It is, can everybody hear me?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, good, because my microphone isn't bobbing up and down with green. All right, so I'm going to proceed. So it's really kind of the end product or the latest increment on a 20-year design evolution that was started by Tom DeFonte and Larry Smarr down at UC San Diego in what was then Cal IT2, now called the Qualcomm Institute of Cal IT2 at UC San Diego. And they started out doing what we probably all started out doing, which was rear projection, you know, calibrating and aligning projectors, trying to keep the bulbs all at the same age, managing the color. But about, I would say, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, they started experimenting with just commodity displays. And some of the first tile displays that they built were using Apple displays, cinema displays. I've even seen them made out of Dells. And the bezels were quite large with those. Kind of jumped off the display track and onto the TV track about 5 or 6 years ago and built the first large-scale 3D installation using LG LCD TVs. The back end is built on commodity PCs and consumer electronics like GTX 1080 graphics cards. We'll get into the details and the particulars of that as we move along. But the thing that I want to impress everybody when you're building this kind of infrastructure, there's sort of two market segments to building this kind of visualization infrastructure that I've observed anyway. And the first is sort of military grade, automotive industry, aerospace, and they turn to turnkey installers that, you know, you give them a shell of a room and they kit it out with, it's usually technology that's much more like what we were doing before we had these high bright panels. It's oftentimes rear projection. You know, they might have moved up to 4K projectors. There really isn't anything higher resolution than that on the market now. But, they're theater projectors, and they're pretty bright, and they do that. It's just that the cost of that is kind of beyond what most institutions can bear, and it takes up a lot of space. The technology that we've adopted really is in a different market segment, and it's consumer electronics. And as you know, if you follow CES or even read Wired magazine or something like that, there's a constant churn of innovation in this space. A few years ago, 3D TVs were kind of the big thing, and that really was the apex for VR technology or for VR implementations of technology on this consumer electronics curve. I don't have a slide for this, but unfortunately, the 3D home market has sort of fallen apart. People have found that it's really hard to do 3D well in the home, and most TV manufacturers are phasing out their 3D televisions. In fact, the OLED 3D 4K TVs that we use in this installation are probably the last of their kind. So we bought extras. We bought 8 extra TVs, and I have 6 remaining. But it is modular and upgradable, and we can still turn to manufacturers like Planar, who will make custom passive panels for us, or we can go to active 3D that's still offered from Sony and some others. I'll address this next point at length later in the presentation, but this is a network-connected infrastructure. So there are 12 PCs in the rendering cluster, and they're connected at 10 gig for the data backplane of this infrastructure. But they're also connected at 10 or possibly 40 or 100 gig around the world to our Science DMZ network. Right now, we're at 10 gig. We have plans later this year to upgrade to 100 gig. And that means that we can connect these visualization infrastructures with others of their kind and do collaborative research with them. So I want to spend a little bit of time on explaining what it is not. It's not a video wall. So it's not just a single video source scaled up across X number of displays. It's not proprietary, so we don't run, usually we don't run any proprietary software. We do have an implementation of Unity 3D, but their licensing model for academics is pretty liberal. It's also not vendor specific. If I wanted to change out any given part in this, I could probably do so. Now, I will have to say that if I wanted to change one television, I would have to change them all because they all need to be uniform. But other than that, it's pretty open. And it's also not expensive. So we built this lab, the core capability of the Wave, for only about $225,000. And when you consider the original budget for a half 8K projection system as a 2-sided cave was $1.3 million from a vendor, it really is rather cost effective. My total budget was $450 or so, and we spent the last $200 building an ecosystem on the other side of the Wave to produce content. So this is what our Wave does. So these are our sort of design goals for the Wave. We want it to provide a profound sense of immersion. And I'm sure many of you have put on VR headsets like from HTC or Oculus Rift or perhaps even Google Cardboard. But those are single-person experiences typically. And while you're immersed, you're also isolated. It's the visual equivalent of putting on a set of headphones. But with the Wave, you can share that experience with others, either locally or distributed over the network. And this mirrors a lot more how people learn and interact. So you get a very good sense of presence, and you can have a shared exploration of the virtual space and data sets. And it allows us to do what humans do, and that's to interpret things collaboratively. In particular, for one of our main use cases, which is cyber archaeology, and that's the application of 21st century measurement and data gathering tools to the craft of archaeology. It really gives us a new perspective on these heritage sites. So unlike being physically on the ground, we can create 3D representations of these sites that are, by the way, destroyed when they're excavated, and we can provide any kind of perspective. We can look at it from above, we can look at it from eye level, we can look at it from below, and really open up at least a snapshot in time for researchers of this particular site. And we found, although I don't have a lot of scientific papers to back this up, but anecdotally, we feel that it allows for an enhanced perception that really does produce nice knowledge accidents. It gives participatory access to cultural resources. So we have data sets that are of sites in Egypt and Jordan and other places from the ancient world that aren't open to the public, but because we've captured them and we can display them on the wave, we can really give people a sense of what those places are like. I call the wave a magic carpet time machine, because we can literally we can figuratively transport people to many, many places. We even have data sets from Mars. And of course, it presents information in novel and accessible ways. And that's the trick with this, is how do you do these visualizations in a way that speaks to people? So we work closely with our academic partners. And interestingly, most of the time, these visualization things go into large spaces in engineering or computer science. Our lab here is in the School of Social Sciences, Humanities, and the Arts. So we have people exploring new ways to tell stories with this infrastructure. So this is just a quick video time lapse of us setting up the wave. Those are just 80-20 things that were designed by Tom DeFondi and Greg Daw from UCSD. And so you can see the frame going up. Each column of the wave is its own separate movable installation. So we can reconfigure this in different ways. We can move these things around. It can be turned into an ellipse or a wall. Now flat wall. Now you might ask yourself, why is it curved? Well, that's because we do 3D, and in order for us to be able to see 3D, we need to have the appropriate viewing angle from the television, and that's a 90-degree normal off the center of the screen. So as you stand about 3 feet or a meter away from the bottom edge of this, you align yourself to each column and get a column size view. So you could not only physically split this up, but you could also carve it up in virtual space as well. So these things live and die on content, and so we weren't going to stop at just building a physical infrastructure. What we did with the extra budget, because we had this DIY approach, was we baked in some extra capabilities. So we start off with 166 megapixel 2D, 3D rendering and computational cluster called the Wave, and that's on a 10 gig network. So we can expose those GPU cards to researchers doing AI and machine learning when the Wave isn't being used. We could also run other kinds of computations. So when we do heavyweight point cloud from images called structure from motion, we leverage these 12 servers to do that CPU computation. As I said, we have single and multi-mode fiber connection to Scenic CalRen HPR network at 10 gigabits per second, which is about anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 times faster than your home high-speed network. We're also participating in the Pacific Research Platform, if you've heard of that. And that's a consortium of UC and other institutions that are collaborating on the facilitation of these distributed workflows. We have got a data transfer node. It's called a Fiona, a fast input-output network appliance. And this allows us to load content over this high-speed network extremely quickly. So we can push out content to other sites or ingest content from other sites just about as fast as the network can carry it. So our bottleneck is no longer at the endpoint. We regularly get 8, 9, 10 gigabit per second throughput on these devices, disk to disk across a wide area network. Because we don't want to stop at visual, and we want to have more data channels than that, we have a 13.2 channel Dolby Atmos system. It does 3D audio rendering. We run a 3D printer maker station. We've got both the resin printer and the more traditional media printers. We can do 4K live streaming and video production. And we have a museum quality display case for physical artifacts. Right now we're just storing our 3D glasses in there and then a little award plate that we got. But eventually that'll get populated with models and things from our 3D printers. And we have additional student and lab spaces behind the scene. So the idea here is that we create a space that will not only display, but also can be used for content creation. And the goal is to turn it into a hub of innovation inside of the School of Social Sciences, Humanities, and the Arts, but also largely for the campus and even beyond campus. We also have a smaller complementary installation called the Tour Cave or the Cave Kiosk. It's over in the library, and it's student run, and it's just up and running all the time. It uses Unity 3D, so people can navigate using a game controller and explore some of the scenes that we can show on the larger wave. Price point's very attractive. At $30K, you're starting to see these pop up around libraries and other institutions around the state. It's fully capable and interactive. It does everything the wave can do. It's just smaller. And so we're planning on using this as an installation to prototype content. There's a course being offered this fall in 3D modeling for cultural heritage, and they'll do their project demos on this smaller installation. So these are our expected outcomes for this infrastructure. Like I said, we want it to be a hub of innovation and multidisciplinary collaboration. We want it to be an attractor for new faculty and to sort of expand the horizons of the faculty that are already here. It is a competitive advantage for grants. We've written 3 or 4 grants against this already. It's a place for students to gain valuable skills in digital arts. So these are the jobs of the future. And so if we can graduate students that have experience in virtual reality and content creation and infrastructure building, that'll make them competitive in the marketplace. And we also want it to be a place to explore new techniques for digital exploration of places of interest, regardless of location, scale, and time. The bar for collecting content is so low, we've had actually collaborations with high school students, and they've helped us set up and choose and capture locations. We have an MOU with the California State Parks to do cultural heritage sites that are at risk, and we've got a couple of programs with high schools around the area to do that. So it is no longer the domain of geeky computer scientists like myself. It is now accessible. And I've long postulated that when creating VR or AR content is as easy as making a video, you will see this technology as widely deployed as video is today. So this is our large sandbox. This is a snapshot of the Global Lambda Integrated Facility, or the GLIF. This is the network of networks that carry all of these advanced network applications. This is largely reserved for science and science traffic. And so we can reach out and do demonstrations to faraway places. In fact, when I was in New Zealand working at the National Research Network down there, we built a small 2x2 wave-like thing. It wasn't 3D, but it was 4K. And we did a demonstration for telemedicine. And we had a patient in San Diego, a primary care physician in Queenstown, New Zealand, and a specialty physician, a dermatologist in Chicago. And we were collaborating real time. The talk that I gave the next year was called the 2-meter mole, because it was a skin exam, and the dermatologist in Chicago said it was better than being there. He could look at this thing in super high resolution. So these infrastructures are supported by the network, and they become part of the network. So we just consider the wave as an extension of our Science DMZ network as part of the Pacific Research Platform. I'm not going to go into detail here, but we're going in a couple of weeks to Montana to talk about a national research platform. And this is really, you can think of this as a human overlay to this network. And it's connecting people and reducing complexity so that these advanced network applications are available to non-computer scientists, non-network engineers. So in support of that, we are building the next generation research network at UC Merced. These are some particulars, but when I got here, we were just starting to do this network refresh. And this January, we got a $422,000 NSF CC STAR grant to build a topologically distinct science network on top of this advanced next generation network. So we expect to be able to push very large data sets, not only from the campus edge, but all the way into campus to the lab or instrument level. And that will allow us to build automated workflows for data movers, leverage our visualization infrastructure, and do all kinds of things that we simply can't do over even a state-of-the-art 1 gig network. And then we have these data appliances called Fionas and Personar, which are measurement tools sprinkled around. So the network is ready when we need it, and no longer do we have to call up a network engineer to be able to be assured that those connections are standing up. So it lets us survive a little bit of benign neglect. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Let me take a moment or two to talk about where we're going. This is Project 2020.
UC Merced is a place of innovation and hope, and its continued growth will surely enhance its capacity to transform the lives of students and enrich its communities.
So I'm going to skip forward here a little bit.
Walk.
We're actually adding
Here we see a mix of
$1.3 billion in new buildings on campus in the next 3 years. So our challenges here are growth and sustainability and scalability. And I don't know how we're going to connect all these buildings up, but I'm pretty excited to see how that'll happen. So some of the key features of our advanced CI roadmap. We're getting a new research computation facility built by Cupertino Electric, and that'll give me all the space to grow that I want. We have this NSF grant to build a Science DMZ. We're going to extend the campus network to include the Sierra foothills and even way up into Yosemite, and then out into the agricultural lands west of campus. And our little cluster here, we have a 1,700 node or 1,700 core cluster. We'll be able to expand. So this is kind of the driver for a lot of this research computing. And I describe it as sort of a 4-tiered model. At the lowest tier, we have the desktop, laptop, and mobile. And those things are just growing more and more. The sensors, the network is getting bigger and bigger. Then on our campus, we have this PI-owned HPC, and that's somebody that might buy a server for their lab, or they might have a racked server in the departmental space, and that's kind of constrained. In fact, our 2 machine rooms on campus are almost fully subscribed. Our campus HPC, which has to fit within those footprints, is highly constrained. So we're evaluating ways for us to move to the cloud, which is theoretically unconstrained. That does require a high-speed network, and it will require sort of a change in thinking on part of our faculty. So we have I have an outreach challenge here. I, just as much as anyone, like to see the blinky lights, and I like to see the blinky lights in my lab, and if I can't see them in my lab, I like to be able to walk over to them in a rack. And the cloud stuff just doesn't have that old world charm. But it's really the only way that we're going to be able to grow to meet the ever increasing demands of scientific computing on our campus. Unlike some other campuses, a lot of the sciences that we engage in here are fledgling science, things that I didn't know about before I came here, and a lot of them leverage computation quite heavily. So in order for us to meet that demand, we're not only doubling our campus size, we're doubling our student population, and we're doubling our faculty. So we're going to have to go to the cloud. And the Science DMZ is one of those things that's going to help us get there. It really is our data superhighway, and it allows us to collaborate with folks such as yourselves. So I'm hoping that most of you or all of you have a Science DMZ on your campus, and you might, after seeing this talk, consider building a wave or a small tour cave, and we can use that infrastructure to collaborate. So a little advocacy on Science DMZ and why should I care. Now Jason's going to know all about Science DMZs. They were pretty much invented at ESNet, and they are its chief champion. Go to fasterdata.net, or is it fasterdata.es.net? Anyway, that's where you find all about Science DMZs. It's an idea that we've adopted wholeheartedly here, and even gotten funding for. So it's getting traction. This is a map of all the places around the world that have similar visualization clusters. So these are the ones that we know about, although the technology is so accessible now that there are probably places that we don't know about. This map was compiled by the Electronic Visualization Lab at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And UC Merced is not on this map because this is just for Sage 2, but the infrastructure is the same, and it's just a software download. So we'll be on the map by SC this fall. And that's about all I have. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to walk you through a video tour of the Wave Lab itself. And I'll let Fisher manipulate the screen while I run the camera. First of all, you can see around the floor, we've got those Dolby Atmos speakers. There's probably about 20 of them in this room as we go around. There's our 20 by 20 matrix. It's 4 high and 5 across. And then the red lights that you see over on the corners, those are the motion capture cameras. And those cameras are what are allowing us to use this 3D wand that Fisher has in his hand for user interaction. Fisher, can you turn on head tracking and put the hat on as well? So we can do head tracking, and that turns the wave from being sort of like a 3D picture you hang on the wall to more like an aperture that you're looking through. And it tracks the user position and adjusts the field of view to match the viewer. This is the one piece of technology that we have on the way that you can't just walk over to Best Buy and purchase. But as Nick Paulus can probably tell you, there's lots and lots of choices for motion capture out there today. This is not an expensive system. It was under $40,000, and it provides everything that we need. We probably wouldn't be able to do full body capture for multiple people, but we can certainly do things like user interaction studies and user tracking as a visualization tool. Each one of these TVs is a 4K OLED, and OLED is organic light emitting diode. That means when they turn off, they really turn off, and the dynamic range is fantastic. Fisher, can you kill this scene and show them how black these screens get? So they really do turn off. The system is still running. We're just not showing any content right now. And so when we do load content, it's big and it's bright and it looks fantastic. So we can take, these are actually stereo panographs. So we take something called a cave cam, which is a VR camera. It's two Panasonic Lumix cameras on a pan tilt auto tripod head. And it takes about 100 images in each camera, and then those get stitched together in software, and we can look all the way up, as Fisher is demonstrating, and all the way down to the floor, and you can see footprints and even the tripod down there. So you can also take other kinds of data sets and turn them into these stereo panographs. Fisher, can you go ahead and take us to Mars, please? So this is from the Curiosity rover, and these are false color images that were taken a few years ago. And then the artist down in San Diego took them and put them together in a VR pantograph and then duplicated the channels for stereo. Now I say false color, which is to say that these were not color images to begin with, but the image scientists, hold still for a second for us, Fisher. Can you put one of those blue rocks right in the middle there? Back the other way. There, that's good. That big rock right there. So they've assigned a color channel to that particular kind of rock, and it's a volcanic rock. The red that you see is sand, and we can even see sedimentary rock, which means that there must have had water. They must have had some kind of liquid, perhaps water there in the past. So somebody with just even a little bit of knowledge about how these images are interpreted can derive quite a bit of knowledge from this. Hey, Fisher, can you show me where the wheel broke? So you can see the track there, and that white line there is kind of soil that was dragged up out when the wheel of the rover broke down in that other area. If we go to the upper left, we can see where it went in. Just go back to the other way, Fisher, to where the track is good, right there. And you can see somewhere that the wheel was working there, and somewhere down in that little valley it broke. Now let's take a look at the some of the point cloud stuff. How about we go to Bodie State Park? It's a ghost town that we've been working on capturing for the last couple of years. And here's some very, very high resolution scans of these Wild Wild West buildings from the mid 18th century, around the gold rush. Each one of these is a separate model, but we could register them all together and use this for something like cultural heritage. So I'm going to see if can you put one of the models right in the middle, Fisher? And I'm going to try to zoom way in so people can see if it adjusts for the color. And because these panels are so pixel dense, you can walk right up to these things and you can see the LiDAR returns, but you can't see the pixels. And oftentimes, when I have these in 3D mode, I see people reaching out with their hands and trying to touch the models because they seem to float right in midair for people. How about we load up Tulum? This is an older data set. Oh, I'm sorry, Tikal. But it's pretty nice. It was gathered at the time in very high resolution, and it's a very complete model. So all of these different patches of scans have been registered and geolocated and put together. So we can see the pyramids at Tikal from just about any angle. Now, if we get in close, we can see that these points are actually, maybe about basketball size. Hold still for us for just a second. And I'll zoom in as far as I can. These geometries are actually constructed of spheres. They're not pixel points like the others. It's a little older. But the overall effect is quite good. And it does a really nice job with foliage. So we're talking to some of our forestry management folks and our biologists about doing scans such as this in places where we want to be able to track the canopy of a forest. And then lastly, let's go to the winery. So this is a winery in the Napa Valley that was damaged by an earthquake a few years ago. And those tractors, can we zoom in on the tractors? I'll zoom in my camera and you can kind of go there. Yeah, that's good. So point at the tractors with the pointer. Those are actually holding this building up. This is the barrel house. So there's millions and millions of dollars worth of wine in this unreinforced masonry building that's about to collapse. So this scan was commissioned by the winery owners, and the structural engineers took a look at this. And I would imagine eventually, after they got the wine out, this building was condemned. But this scan is remarkable because it is a more modern scan. It's got a level of detail to it, so you can see the high resolution point clouds popping in and out. The foliage looks absolutely great. You can even detect people every now and then. So we like to show it because it gives a hint at the kind of quality that you could get out of more modern scanning techniques. So this was drone footage, LiDAR footage, and all kinds of data sets coming together. This content was made by UC San Diego and shared with us. So it's something I like to show. And if I zoom way in with my camera, if focus will hold, you'll see that there's quite a lot that can be gathered from these images. You could also do a version that was texture mapped, so it looked solid, but we like the point cloud because it illustrates the technique and how these things were created. Well, I'm going to wrap up my my portion of it for now, and maybe if people have questions, they can either chat them or unmute themselves and ask. And I'd like to thank you all for your time before I mute and listen more than I talk. So I'll turn it over back to Jason.
All right, thank you, Jeff. That was really incredible. I always love seeing these visualizations. I remember seeing the one at Cal IT 2 years ago. So I have a couple questions that I've jotted down. What was the cost again of this? I thought I heard you say about 40,000. Is that correct?
Oh, 40,000 would be for the smaller 3-panel version. 30 to 40,000. The Wave itself total costs about 225,000. We got a pretty good deal on the TVs. The list price on these TVs was $3,000. We got them for $2,225 each. So I think I bought most of what B&H had on hand at the time, which was 28. They're a little hard to find these days. So people building these systems are falling back to the LCD panels because those are still made in 3D. And they're about the same price point. In the future, if you wanted OLED panels that are 3D, you might have to have them custom made, and then they could cost upwards of $5,000, maybe $10,000 a piece. So those are kind of the part of the puzzle right now that the replacement budget is a little unknown. I built a budget for replacement of all this technology, and surprisingly, the cost to replace it is about 50% more than the cost to build it originally. And most of that is because of the obsolescence of these 3D TVs. Our total budget was $450,000, and we spent about an additional $200,000 for the content development tools. Things like the iMac that I'm showing you, talking to you on now, the HD webcam that we're using to show you the images, the 3D printers, the software. Most of it didn't cost a whole lot to license, but some of it was kind of expensive. Things like the Pro Audio tools and the Pro Video editing tools are a little expensive. We spent about $10,000 on the 3D stereo pantograph camera rig. But the idea behind the rest of that budget was to create an ecosystem around the Wave that could be used to attract people to help make content. I'm not a humanist, I'm a computer scientist. And so attracting people that can help you create content is the idea about building the lab. So we didn't spend our entire $450,000 budget. We spent around about $425,000, and I was able to return $25,000, which isn't something that a lot of people who build these large infrastructures can actually say. A lot of times they do go over budget. So we hit our target pretty well.
Okay, thank you. Brett typed in a question. Is the visual impact affected very much with newer TVs?
Well, they still make OLED TVs. They make them in 2D. They don't make 3D OLEDs anymore. And yes, the visual impact is noticeable. So we're in 2D mode right now, just because that's the way that's easiest for a camera to pick up. But Fisher, can you turn on eye separation and show people? So this is what it looks like when you turn on the stereo, and you'd need to be wearing the 3D glasses. The other panel, the other tour kiosk that we have, okay, and go ahead and turn it off so they can see how the things converge. There you go. Thanks. Those are LCDs, and they look pretty good. But people that are tracking, TV picture quality will say that still these LG OLEDs are about peak visual acuity. Some of the stuff that other manufacturers like Samsung, they have a technology called QOLED, still LCD, but they're getting fancy with the masking and the stuff that happens behind the glass. They look pretty good, but the blackest black that you see there at the top, you don't get that with LCD. So there's a minor impact. The dynamic range of these is quite wide, and they can represent, billions of colors. Each pixel has its own LED for red, blue, green, yellow, and white. and they're really stunning. Okay, so I see another question here. How much power does the display system draw? Good question. So this room that we're in was not originally designed for this installation. This is just sort of like general space. And so we had to kind of design the system around this room. Originally, it was designed for a 2 or 4 projector rear projection 1990 style cave system. And I had overhead power, which you can't see. On the other side of the lab, there are no ceiling tiles, and it's just open. I had 3 20 amp circuits, and that was not enough to power the PCs and the displays. So we had to put in 3 30 amp circuits, and those power the majority of the rendering nodes. The TVs are actually on a separate circuit, and there are 3 15 amp circuits that power the televisions. So if we add it all up, we have about 135 amps for the system. We monitor it because we run everything through some really nice UPSs from APC that are rack mount. And when we're doing, it's actually the stereo pantograph images that peg the power. Each panel has its own dedicated graphics card, and there are 2 graphics cards per server. So there are 10 rendering nodes in this system. And when we are running the stereo pantographs, they are drawing the full 90 amp load to be able to do that. There's very little data communication going back and forth once the data are loaded, because each rendering node gets its own set of the data. And the CalVR software, which is what we're using right now, is actually just telling the graphics pipeline what portion of the data set to render. So the communication back and forth is rather lightweight, but the power draw is significant. So if I were to design this room from scratch, I probably would put in a minimum of 200 amps on separate breakers. And I would have the electricians put in the breakers not in a locked closet in the next room, but actually in the back of the lab, so I had access to them, so I don't have to call the electrician if I need to reset a panel, which we haven't had to do since we upgraded the power, but we are right on the edge. So Tom DeFonte, who helped us design this system, says, leave your toaster oven at home. We don't put anything extra. And in fact, I'm using our 10 gig network to offload some of the non-essential stuff like the Fiona and the GPU cluster that's in an expansion chassis. So we're using every bit of that 160 amps that's available to us.
Okay.
And I believe that this facility actually pushed our whole building out of its LEED Platinum certification, because I do have to have the air conditioning running in here a little bit higher than I normally would, which is just what you get when you don't build a room to spec and it's retrofitted.
Okay, anybody else have any other questions? I guess I have one more.
Okay.
With the expansion of your campus, are you planning on moving this out of its current room or building any more of these to facilitate research anywhere else?
Well, we are getting a black box theater, which is kind of really great, and we're getting an auditorium. I'm on the design review committee. It's unclear to me whether or not we're going to have the kind of infrastructure to support this kind of installation. But we will do something over there along a similar vein. It might be more of a traditional 2D wall. That's TBD. Every time I go in one of these meetings, I say, what about the network? And everybody gives me a blank stare. because you can't really do any of this stuff without a high-speed network. That's kind of my number one thing that I need. So I had to actually put the 10 gig network drop in this building, and I used my lab budget to do so, but it was really important to be able to do that. So I hope so. But again, every time we make a change to the design, it costs us money, and the AV budget is already really tight. So if we do put in anything over there, it's going to have to be driven by a grant, something like an MRI grant. So time will tell. We're pretty happy with the facility that we have, and I love that we're in our humanities, in the middle of the digital humanities suite. So it's a pretty good spot to be in. I don't have any plans on moving yet.
Okay, I did think of one more, so I lied when I said that was my last one. Is this documentation available online anywhere or no?
You mean my presentation?
Well, I'll want a copy of that as well to post, but more importantly, if somebody wanted to build one of these on their own.
Not really, but the guys down in San Diego and I are happy to consult with you. You can go to the Sage 2 website at EVL, and they've got a lot of how-tos. If you're just interested in a turnkey system, you can go out and buy a 2x3 or a 2x2 mounting system from somebody like Chief off of B&H for a couple $1,000s. That's what we did in New Zealand. And it allowed us to hang TVs and then rack and stack the servers right next to it. I suspect that there are a lot more of these out there than are on my map because the tech is so accessible. If you'd like to build one, I'm happy to consult with you and would do that at no charge. I don't own the technology. I mean, it's basically was developed under NSF grants from out at UC San Diego, and they're happy to help as well. So the answer is no, there isn't sort of a go-to site for that, but we're happy to help shepherd people along. We've put systems into the Hearst Library at UC Berkeley, the Geisel Library at UC San Diego, the Collegian Library here at UC Merced, which I showed you, and also the library at UCLA. And those were all done sort of, on my part anyway, pro bono. Before we sign off, I want to invite Fisher over here, and I would like everybody to acknowledge his expert help. Fisher is my undergraduate assistant, so thanks for driving, Fisher.
Yeah, gets to use the lawn. I love it.
Yeah, yep.
All right, well, thanks so much, Jeff and Fisher. Yes, Jeff, please send me your PowerPoint slides. I'll make sure I stick those in the folder along with the recording from today.
Will do.
And for everybody else's benefit, we have another talk next week, same time. It'll be the folks from Montana, and they will be talking about their science DMZ as they prep for that big workshop that you mentioned.
Yep, see you all there, right?
Yeah. So thanks again, everybody, for joining, and we'll talk to everybody soon.
Bye.
Great stuff. Thanks, Jeff.
Bye, Nick. See you in a couple of weeks.